Hello and welcome to the Work Inspired Podcast. I'm your host, George Lucas Pfeiffer, and on today's episode, we've got another incredible guest. Scott Delano, who is the design principal at Studio GC, is a wealth of knowledge on all things workplace and interior design. And that's what we're going to do today. Do a deep dive into the world of interior design and understand why spaces are being designed the way that they are and what does it look like to create a high-performing modern workplace. You're going to learn a lot on this conversation. Work Inspired starts right now. Scott, thank you for being here.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here.
So excited. We've rescheduled a couple times, and I've been looking forward to this for quite some time. So thanks for coming in. Thanks for doing it in person.
Yeah.
And excited to talk about design and workplace today.
Excellent, as am I.
So let's start by getting to know you a little bit.
Sure.
Tell me the Cliff Notes version of your professional story.
Sure. So some important factors to understand. I'll give you like three quick little snippets.
Okay.
Right? So picture it. I'm 8 years old.
Oh,
I'm on a bicycle.
okay.
Riding around. So I grew up not far from, and had family not far from Harvard University.
Okay.
And so there's a Corbusier building on the campus.
Okay.
Right. And it has this long, impressive ramp that takes you from the grade in front up to the main level where you walk in. The lower levels are studios, actually with quite tall ceilings, but they're partially submerged. So
Okay.
it's also a remarkable building because it is a brutalist concrete box in the middle of Harvard's campus, which is otherwise the beautiful brick and blah, 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 right? So it stands out because of its material. It stands out because of its form. It has this crazy ramp. So I'm riding my bike. I ride my bike up the ramp and then back down the ramp because that's what you do, right?
Yeah.
When you're 8.
Yeah, sure.
And so one of the times I'm doing it, one of the professors comes out and says, can you please stop riding your bike up and down this ramp? And I said, well, if you don't want people to ride up and down, why did you put this giant ramp here?
Yeah, exactly.
Like there's no other hills around. Where am I going to go for
right.
this? So, and we had a little bit of a conversation. He was like, basically said, do you want to see the inside of the building then? Because I, said it's this big windowless, and I said something to the effect of, didn't even know there were people in here because you can't actually see the window. So he was like, do you want to see the inside? I was like, yeah, sure. So I go in and I, for those listening, watching, I was not alone. I was with actually a cousin. I wasn't just randomly wandering around in Cambridge by myself. And so we go into the space and these are these beautiful, well-lit spaces. It's just that you couldn't see the windows from where I was, right? So a few different spaces were interesting, but the one that really struck me and one that has stuck with me to this day, we walked into, and he opened the door to his office. Now it was a white hallway door, opened the door. His office is magenta because the wall facing the window, not the window, but the wall facing the window is painted magenta. So the light coming in bounces off of that and changes the tenor of the room entirely. It blew my mind. I was like, what is happening? What is this magic?
As an 8-year-old.
Wow. I just thought it was the coolest thing. And so at that point, I was starting to become really interested in sort of materials and color just in my environment generally, right? And so that was sort of an awakening moment. And the ramp itself, like why put a ramp here if you don't want me to use it?
Right.
Like, this ramp is telling me to use it, right? So this is my little 8-year-old brain trying to figure that out. Then go to my brother and my dad both worked in construction. And so I was able to see plans that were for construction at a very young age. And I could read them even at that, which is not a skill that everybody has. And, it's not one that I'm proud of having or, it's just, I was fortunate to have it.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I was able to sort of read the plans. And even at like 10 years old, I was like, well, that's not a very good idea. Right. So I was an opinionated child.
Sure.
So and looking at that and sort of understanding is sort of, well, I think this would be better if this, I would think. So I was always sort of interested in space and spatial relationships. Then fast forward to teenager, helping my dad. My dad was a mechanic. And then, went from being a mechanic to working for some of the large motor companies and blah, 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 in the service line, but sort of as a manager. But, and he loved cars. I still love cars to this day. And so we were restoring cars. And I remember just being fascinated by how things came together and what decisions they made as to why it would be this. And so frequently when we would do sort of the repair work, restoration work, we'd restore it. And we weren't doing this for, a car show to win the most original vehicle, right? It was always looking at, well, how can we change it? Like if we have to take it out, right? Then how can we tweak it and make it a little bit better, right? And so this thought process that just because it's there doesn't mean it's right.
Yeah.
And just because it works doesn't make it works its best, right? And if you can influence that and make it better, why not, right?
Yeah.
So, these sort of form these linkages of fascinated by buildings, fascinated by space, fascinated by the more intricate design, right? And so looking at these levels. And then also, I grew up with a family that, that had a fairly strong religious beliefs and religious foundation. Irish Catholic, for those who care. And within that, it was learning a lot of those teaching were learning about being of service, that your job on this earth is to be of service to others, right? And so, and that was a huge part of my upbringing, right? And so you have these sort of overlaying notions of like space is beautiful and the details matter and you should be of service, right? That all sort of bundles together to sort of where I am today. And, and I brought that sort of that sensibility and that thought process to the projects regardless of scale. And, I had the good fortune to work at a large firm in Boston as one of my first firms, as Sasaki Associates. And I was working on master plans for campuses and I was working on buildings for those campuses. And then I also got the opportunity to work on interiors for the buildings on those because the people there were generous and lovely. And I just asked if I could help.
Yeah.
Right. My degree said architect, but I was doing all of the things because I was curious. I was fascinated by it and understanding these basic tenets. Apply at all scales, right? The experience matters. Sure. The details matter. Like there isn't a shorthand that gets you to a great solution. It takes work. It takes thought, right? And it takes drawing it as well, which is, I'm a little bit sad because it seems like we have lost that sort of refinement that comes from drawing in many of the educational tracks now, and even within the office. Because everything is now through the computer, you have to, it's becoming more fluid, which is great. But it's still not as fluid as if I'm drawing and that isn't starting to work. Just another piece, like, right? Yeah. And you shift gears in a more fluid way. So I think it has to be a balance of both. But in looking at that, like understanding, like bringing that to bear on all of these spaces, regardless of their scale, is an approach that I when I'm mentoring staff, like I said, look, you need to take a step back from the thing that you're doing and understand it in the context and figure out if that's the right solution.
Yeah.
It may be a beautiful solution and that's awesome. And you can save that beauty for something else if it's inappropriate for this. Right. But like we're here to do a thing for somebody. Right. And so these sort of all come together. And I see looking back at my career very clearly sort of how these influences have come. I even had it I was teaching at UW Milwaukee for a bit and I regularly get asked to come and do guest critiques for design studios, which I love, right? Because they're all passion in no direction, right? Yeah. They're like, this is amazing. Like, you're right. It's impossible, but it's amazing, right? Yeah. And so, but finding the sort of kernel, the nugget in that amazing, unbuildable thing, it's like, okay, while that isn't possible, what that can lean to that is. Like, what that can give you that feeling can we do? And working through that, right? I mean, I'm always amazed by people's creativity and their opportunity to see beyond themselves, right? And creativity is crazy that way, right? Because it's not something that is internal looking for what we do, right? Other creatives internally looking is the way they do it, but for us, it has to look beyond ourselves, but also beyond the horizon that we know. You have to be brave to get to that edge and look beyond. And you will be wrong some of the times when you go beyond and step beyond. And that's okay. Right?
Yep.
You have to sort of sublimate that fear and say, I have to take a risk here. And I mean, I'm not talking like you're literally getting to the edge with the lemmings and jumping and hoping for the best, right? Right. Like you're going to the edge of what other people have thought and done and been like, what works here? What doesn't work here? And I had the good fortune to grow up in a large family, and all of our gatherings, in my memory of them and in my experience of them now, are dominated by laughter, right? Just absolutely dominated. I have a family of talkers, probably no surprise, as we're saying. And storytellers. Like I grew up with amazing storytellers. That's something that space can do, and it's something that I do while presenting space, right?
Yep.
we engage with the story. We understand it. We see ourselves in it, right? And that laughter is something that I also bring frequently to talk with staff about. If they're stuck, I'll say, okay, what's funny about this? Because if you look at like humor, generally speaking, the broadness of humor is many times it's something that is a juxtaposition of things that don't belong together, right?
Yeah.
Cats and pants. Hilarious, right? They don't belong together. So, you look at that and people will sort of trigger that laughter, but that also opens your mind in that moment. If you're stuck, make it funny. It may not be the answer, but it opens you up for the next step. And sometimes it is the answer, right?
Yeah.
And so infusing that humor and what we do is wonderful. It's a beautiful thing. It's creative.
Right.
Like we are not working in salt mines, people. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, there is work involved, but it's beautiful work. It's lovely work. It's such satisfying work. Like we should all be happy to be able to do it every day. You walk through half of these studios and you're like, oh, you didn't meet your salt quota today, right?
Your salt quota.
You're like, maybe you should step outside, go look at the world. It's beautiful, and come back in with the recognition that you are actually doing a beautiful thing in a beautiful world, and you're helping to make it better.
I love that perspective.
And
I love that you, from such an early age, the genesis of you were able to identify early on what was of interest to you and what you loved to do. I'm interested when you mentor or when you teach, when you approach, a younger designer. Do you look for that same sort of sense of direction?
Well, I look more for a sense of curiosity, right? That's more important. Like I can help you find some direction.
Sure.
I can't make you care and I can't make you curious.
Right.
If you don't have either of those, it's going to be a harder walk for you.
Yeah.
Right.
Makes a lot of sense.
Because the foundation of what we do and I'll distinguish because, the process that we go through for any project has the upfront creative heavy process. And then it has the, back-ended, more detailed process. There's design and there's beauty and creativity in both sides of those, but just one requires more emphasis on it in the beginning and less on the back end. And so I work predominantly with the designers on that sort of front end.
Sure.
So that curiosity, if you come to me and say, I'm having a hard time figuring this out, great. What have you looked at? If the answer is, well, just this. Well, I don't know. Maybe think about something else that's related to it.
Yeah.
So when we do vision boards, because I also try not to get clients mired in thinking of other people's spaces. Like when we do a visioning session, a lot of, and I've seen this in a lot of places, they'll use other offices and they'll just show you like 30 office spaces being, what do you like? What do you not like?
Sure.
Right. And that's helpful. It creates a common language and great. But you've already sort of told them you're playing within these bounds. So when we do a visioning session and we do a material palette board, I ask the staff to find fashion photography, find nature photography, find photography of events, right? Lively events, quiet events. Like find things that speak to the spirit of what they want. Because if you have that more open mind and you're thinking more broadly, you'll find better solutions than if you're only looking at the thing.
Yeah.
Right? So, and I use this analogy when we're talking to new clients and potential new clients. I mean, we have the water bottle. You're like, I know looking at this side of the water bottle, what is happening.
Right.
I mean, I can understand the whole of it, but I cannot tell you with exquisite detail what's happening on that side because I cannot see it. I can tell you what's happening here in exquisite detail. You can tell me what's happening right there.
Sure. Yeah.
I can't see what you can see. That's where you're my partner in solving that and defining it and understanding it. And it's that way of looking at the problem, but also taking that a step back and looking more broadly at what do you want the experience to be. I know how to craft spaces to elicit emotions that you're looking for. I've been doing this for 30 years. There are some clear pathways that get to a sense of being in a space.
Okay.
There are clear pathways to encourage me to either go this way or that way, to encourage me to be loud, to encourage me to be quiet. Right? The space tells you with these triggers how you should be in the space. And you're not thinking about it, but it creates these, archetypical experiences, right? A low space with low lighting and soft surfaces. You will be quiet in that space. It's telling you to be quiet. right? So I can do that. Yeah. But what I can't tell you is I can tell you what all of those look like from this side, like how to make those things sort of, or encourage those things. You can't force, but how to encourage those things, right? But you're the one that has to tell me what you want to encourage.
Sure. Yep.
And then a lot of what we've seen is, there was a huge sweep. This was happening before the pandemic, but there was a huge sweep to be, and I was really excited to see it, to be more mindful of the spaces that we're designing for the clients we're designing them for, right? So you look back in like the 80s, cubicle farm was the thing, right?
Yeah.
That's what you did.
Yeah.
And, before that, a largely closed office environment, right? And then Google and the tech thing, and everybody's like, well, open office is like the thing. Okay. It was significantly cheaper to do open office because you took less square foot per head. So large portfolio of space holders loved it. Why wouldn't they?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And it was great for a group at Google, right? Or insert tech company here because of the work that they were doing. Yeah. That instant connection to my colleagues was what drove the innovation. That was important, but it was part of their workflow. Not everybody has that workflow. Yet we decided that was a cool looking office. So we're all going to do the cool looking office. Yeah. And then we'll get the same results as them. Yeah. No, you won't.
Right.
Like, when does that ever happen? Right. So there was already sort of a sweep towards really getting a better understanding of who you are. The temple at Delphi, know thyself, right? It's that's really the first step. Like, know your staff, know your culture, know your work, and design to those things.
What percentage of the companies that you work with know themselves?
More than I originally thought. I assumed it would be virtually nobody.
Okay.
Right. You come in there, you're all cocky, like, I can help you figure this out because I know a lot more than you do. Right. You're like, apparently you know a lot more than I thought.
Right.
Right. But you go through those exercises a couple of times. You're like, we have this cultural analysis tool, and they are useful and they're great. And, and we don't author one, we don't make one. Like, literally, there are lots of people with PhDs that's what they did.
Right.
Perfectly happy to use your cultural assessment tool as a way of understanding and helping them to understand. And by and large, what I found is there's levels of understanding. There's the high level of understanding, which is usually an external view. So most people know about their company what others think about it. That's easy. You can read it. Right. Glassdoor will tell you what people think of your company. Right. And your marketing and PR department is working very hard to tell the world that this is what you are. So that's like the outside thing. That's the easy one. Right. And then you get to the second one, which is actually knowing a little bit more about the individual staff and the culture. So, culture is a collection of values and behaviors that a group shares, any organization, any group. Corporate culture is the values and behaviors that everybody who works there shares, and the additional piece of the things that your group does distinct from others. That's what makes the difference between just culture and your workplace culture.
Right.
But it has to be that combination of those two. And, that understanding that and getting to the root of, so what are your behaviors and what are your distinctions? Usually people can get close to what those are before you've actually done any sort of analysis and review of it. But there's always going to be something that's illuminating in the process. And it's usually more around the change, because the C-suite does not drive cultural change. Culture takes time to build and create. And it's all of us who are in it that create it.
Okay.
You can design culture, but it is a long and deliberate process, right? So in looking at that, you're looking at the things where you're trying to create rewards for behaviors that you want to encourage and create impediments to behaviors that you want to change, right? Carrot and stick.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And space can help with that, but so there's the two types of sort of designing culture. There's the sort of driving the culture as an intellectual construct and as an experience.
Yeah.
And then there's driving the culture using architecture and design to sort of help support it.
When you look at a space, so obviously you can look at culture almost by industry. Like a legal firm is going to be probably a different culture than a tech startup, right? Yeah. And that's generally speaking. Yeah. And then you get into the X specific firm and you've got the brand and the marketing and here's what we're different, here's what we do differently. Right. Come work for us because of this. Yeah. So that's the marketing spin on the culture, right? And then you get into the company and you start looking around. How are people interacting with each other? What are they able to do? What are the processes, the policies, the communication cadence? And that's the internal kind of culture of it. And then you talk about leaders and the people that you work with that are actually stakeholders or wallet holders as it relates to investing in space.
Yes.
And when you say know thyself, how often do they come in and they just say, this is who we are and this is what we want to do, help us get a space where this can happen?
Right.
Or, and this is a kind of a two-part question, because we've seen since the pandemic with so much change, so much uncertainty, and now as we've come out of it, got to start making some plans, right? Got to start making some investments into the next 5 years, but it's a shorter runway than it's at, it's a shorter time period that we might be making an investment for, whether that's because of lease, shortened leases or just because of the pace of change.
Yeah.
How do you help them navigate that? Because they're trying to make a decision for a space that should support one of those culture types.
Right.
And then maybe what the marketing team or the external perception is really different than what's going on inside the building.
Sure.
Do you kind of sit down and help them kind of understand, like, is it more goals based to say like, hey, we want more collaboration. People just aren't interacting with each other enough. Or is it more like, this is our vision for the future. How do you help us get there?
Yeah.
And I think because we've heard a lot of our clients say, show us some effective modern workplaces, because we don't even know what it looks like, right? So I guess there's a lot of questions in that, but how are you kind of helping guide leaders to make effective decisions here in 2023?
Sure. So it's important to meet them where they are first.
Right.
Sort of come to where you exist in this and understand what you've already accomplished, right?
Yep.
What cultural things you think are great and you want to sustain.
Sure.
And what things that you may want to improve upon, right? So we want more collaboration. Great. Where are you with collaboration now, right? Having that conversation of, we have one conference room. Okay.
Yeah.
Does it fit all your people? And really, you should have a lot more small ones. But, talking about that. And it's also about understanding, like, in that conversation, when you're talking with them about sort of where they are and where they want to go, understanding what, and being very clear about what the space can help with and cannot help with, right? Because, we'd like our people to be nicer. Okay, well, I mean, here are some small things I can do, but really it starts with you.
The task share isn't going to do that.
Right, exactly. Well, and it's important to sort of meet them where they are and then show them where they could go, right? And a lot of times, I mean, I've had this conversation a number of times with clients. We're like, we want more collaboration. Great, that's a key word you've heard. And it helps.
Yeah.
Awesome. What does it mean for you?
Right.
How do you collaborate? And I have witnessed a number of different types of collaboration. I've categorized them. I don't have a white paper. I apologize. But in looking at it, there's iterative collaboration where I do a piece and then you do a piece from my piece, right? And then we all work together to sort of take the thing and keep working on it.
Right.
But the core thing, the idea, the whatever it is the same, right? I would say that there's also cooperative collaboration, which is what most people think of, is that we're all going to go in the room and be nice and blah, blah. Okay, that is a type of collaboration. There's also competitive collaboration, right? I have to do my thing and I'm competing with you to get the best version of it for this overall project. Or another type of competitive collaboration. I'd worked for a bank for their mutual fund groups. There were multiple groups, each of whom had their own fund. And so when they talked about the way that they worked, there was a high level of competition within there that they wanted to understand, because they were using it as a way to drive better performance.
Right.
And they wanted their standard. It was a large bank, right? So they had standards.
Yeah.
And like, okay, well, I guess we need some of this, there's some of this. What are you trying to accomplish with this? So we took all of their parts and pieces, rearranged them a little bit, so that way there was a central walkway where all the trading teams had to walk through from the front door to the cafe. And the collaboration areas with the leaderboards of how that fund was doing, looking at that main walkway. So when you went to go get your cup of coffee, you were like, ooh, Tom's team's doing real bad. And, my team is not doing well. I need it, right?
Right.
And so then everyone's like, and now everyone, like, the way that their culture was, it was important for them to know what others were doing. And so they were sending out emails to tell everybody how I was like, well, then you're not actually engaging them, right? And if this is important to how you want to drive your business forward, do a type of collaborative area that will fund that competitive spirit. But also, because their idea was, and I believe it's true, if each individual fund did better because of that competition, then their entire group does better, right?
Makes sense, yeah.
Right. And so, but they started out saying, yeah, we need more collaborative areas. I'm like, yeah, but for what?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
you just told me that your people compete on everything.
Mm-hmm.
And that also meant that, they had sort of, we wound up giving them 2 collaboration area types.
Mm-hmm.
One, which were the large collaboration that were along that walkway,
mm-hmm.
and others that were the little hidey holes at the back, where if they were like, we're working on something that we don't want anyone else to know about,
there's some privacy.
Right? So, but it's getting into a little bit more of a robust conversation. But what do you mean by that?
Right.
Or when people start to talk about privacy, what do you mean by that? Because that's a catch-all phrase for many people.
Yeah.
Like, does that mean you're just trying to tell me you feel like you need your own private office and therefore privacy is your wall?
Check the box. Yeah. Right. Well, you gave, when we were touring the last time you were here, you gave some awesome. The acoustics privacy and all the different ways of that. Explain that. I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah. So there are loosely 5 or 6, depending on who you ask, 5 or 6 distinct intellectual concepts or constructs that create our notion of privacy.
Mm-hmm.
So there's visual privacy. Only I can see what I want to see. Sound privacy. Only I can hear what I want to hear, which related to that would be sort of the sound privacy of, it's okay if I hear that someone is speaking, but not what they are saying.
Mm-hmm.
And that's an important distinction I have to try to explain to clients, because you don't want total silence either, because that's distracting.
Mm-hmm.
But like sitting in the middle of a call center trying to figure out a very difficult math problem isn't going to work for you.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So then there's also, so privacy is a lot of privacy is related to security.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so there's alone together.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So coffee shop. Perfect alone together.
Yep.
Right. Each of us is alone. I don't have to engage with you. But if something were to happen that would affect my well-being and everyone got up to leave, I know that I should probably also get up to leave.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Right? And then there's away, but away from my group, but still within it, right? So that's if you have a group setting at work and you're looking at your work lounge or your work cafe, right? I am within visual connection or earshot of my colleagues who are looking out for me, right? So I can do my heads down space near them, but just away from them. And that's privacy.
Right.
I have my stuff that I'm working on. But again, comes back to safety and security. Like if, Godzilla is smashing through the window and I don't happen to see it, all my colleagues would most likely, I would hope, say, Tim, you should probably come with us, right? And then along goes Tim. So, and then the last one is a sort of protected overlook. The sense, and you've experienced it and you love it, of course you do. And so it's like that front porch setting where I'm in a space where I'm interacting. I can choose to be engaged in this, or I can choose to sort of recede slightly. I'm still in it, but I'm not, I'm still of it, but I'm not in it.
Right.
And so I'm blanking on the,
well, I thought it was fascinating. We were looking at a social area in our space, and you had mentioned that some of this goes back to the caveman days.
Yeah.
Where if you have your back up against something, that's you feel safe because like in the cave, you're not going to have a bear come from behind you.
Yeah.
You can see out in front of you. Right?
Yeah. And there's and I can't remember his name, but there was I read a study on it, and it talked about this type thing. The reason that you like that experience is because you came from the people who lived, right? So the people who were deep in the forest could get snuck up on by predators,
right?
And there was no way to see them coming, and so you were sort of trapped,
right?
So there were some things that were safe about it, but you were also at risk. The people who were on the savannah, out in the grasslands, could not outrun anything.
They could see it, but they couldn't escape it.
So they also got eaten. So the people who lived, according to his theory, were the people that lived at the edge. So I could step out into the openness if I thought something was coming from behind me and see it and protect myself. And if something was coming across the savannah, I could get up into the trees or get back into a spot where I could protect myself.
Yeah.
So his notion is that we are drawn to that because literally we are born from the people who lived, who were the edge people.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
That's cool.
Yeah.
It all kind of translates to me because, like we hear a lot about choice at work now. You got to have the focus areas. You got to have the collaborative areas. People want to have choice in where they work. And that makes sense, right? Yeah. But then you pair that with an intentional space, knowing what the space is supposed to do.
Yep.
And blend that all in with consolidated footprints, maybe, like people shedding some of their real estate. How do you guide your clients down the path that says, we can't have this space be everything to everybody, right? But we also want to offer choice so people come and feel like they can be, choose where they're going to be the most effective during their day.
Right.
how do you strike the right balance?
So a few different ways to get there. So either way, you're going to be creating a change for the people who are using the space. Okay. Right. Yeah. So change that is done to you is distressing, right? But change that you choose is exhilarating. Ooh, yeah. So you want them to be excited about it, right? So that engagement is important.
Bring them along.
Yeah. Right. Change management. We all do the change management thing. Yeah, right? It's not new. Yeah. Communication, involvement leads to better outcomes, right? And so in that, so if you have a company that has, a office space holding now, and they're looking at moving into the next one, and there's a little bit of time, and we're in a unique part of that sort of cycle where lots of companies have all kinds of space and currently have all kinds of time because their leases aren't up, and they're looking at sort of what's coming next. This is a unique opportunity, I think. I worked for a campus planning. It was architecture and sort of all these things, but it was the campus planning was one of the groups that I worked with. And what was interesting to me is they would intentionally, if a client was willing, encourage them to do just a planted grass lawn where the quad would be between all the buildings and let the students tell you where the walkway should be. These are called desire paths, right? Or desire lines. Yeah. So people start to go down these paths because it's the most expeditious way for them, or it's a more pleasant way, right? Yeah. So you make these choices. And so it takes one or two, and as soon as the path starts to go, others follow that path, right? But the end result was that you had something that effectively your user cohort chose because they told you where it was going. So they accept it far more readily, right? And so, looking at that and translating it to the office, right? Talking about, okay, we recognize that you're working differently now. Instead of us looking for tread pattern in the carpet, which we will never see, right? So not the direct correlation.
Stuff in some mud before you enter the workspace.
Exactly. Yeah. Here's a little bit of mud. I need you all to walk around. Or just, here's some glow in the dark dye. Right? When you go home tonight, we're going to see where everybody walks. But we have ways of understanding where people are going and what they're using, heat mapping, sort of all these things. But also let people know what's happening because then it's just creepy. Yeah. Right? Yeah, exactly. You're being monitored. Okay. But make it an intentional effort, right? And say, okay, we are going to take the next 3 months, right? And you all are going to tell us how the space is being used, where it is efficient and where it is not. Instead of me, who doesn't do your job or your job or your job, deciding for you, right? If you have the time and space, you can get a lot of good data from that. You get a lot of understanding of, oh, I didn't realize that this group worked with that group so often, right? So for the heat mapping, it'll tell you a lot of that. But there's an important follow-up to that is once you have sort of the understanding of where the spaces are being used and what those traffic patterns look like, having a conversation with the groups, all of who participated, say, what could make this better for you? Not with a promise that all of it's going to happen, right? But the more information, the more data we have, the better decisions we make. And when we share that data with you and you're engaged in it and you have participated, your acceptance of that is much higher, right? So that's one path to take to that if you have
prioritizing the things that you're doing in your space based off of what the people in the space are saying they need or showing you they need.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
And your groups will all work differently. Yeah. So the challenge is taking that and saying, okay, so your accounting group is going to work differently, most likely than your sales group, right? And so you don't want to design an accounting office within your space and then a sales office within your space. Unless you are an organization that is that compartmentalized, right? That'd be fine. Or if it's one that doesn't need the flexibility to where when you look at the long view of your space, you may have to be more flexible and agile about who goes where and how those teams work. But if you are like most companies and you're going to lean into that flexibility and adaptability, taking it to its most extreme of these guys need this, these guys need this, and then looking and finding pieces that can work for both and be adapted, right? I mean, furniture manufacturers have understood a kit of parts better than most for a very long time, right? And how to sell that kit of parts and understand that, oh, right now this workstation is a 6x6, but with these 3 panel changes, it's now a bench. That's a 6-foot bench or whatever it is. Right. And just talking about how to work with what you have and leaning into the flexibility. And so a while ago, all before pandemic, I was working with a group that they literally changed the entire team every 18 months because they would have a project, they would work on that and they would disperse and be reconvened with another group for another project.
In the same space.
In the same space. Yeah. So we had worked with them to take a range, and it essentially went from the window line into the core, right? Of what was at the core fixed assets. The copy rooms, phone rooms, bathrooms, stairs, elevators, right? The more fixed item. Then next out from that were things that were changeable, but you would need facilities to make the change, right?
Yep.
Then the next, and that was both furniture walls and, furniture, large installations of furniture, workstations. Then next out from that, ones that could be easily adaptable just by a standard maintenance person, not the facilities team. And then last out was hackable, meaning I could make it what I need. My team and I could just blow it up and do whatever we wanted to do with it.
And that was the closest to the windows.
That was the closest to the windows.
Oh, I like it. Layers of flexibility.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And so that worked for them because their teams basically got a column line to column line, that grid from the core to the window.
Yeah.
So they had fixed assets, flexible assets, adaptable, and hackable, where they're like 4 layers of it. And once they understood what the space was and how they would use it, they adopted it and they embraced it. And it was fascinating. Like I'm sure most architecture and interior design firms would be horrified when they walked in because you could not take a photograph of the space because it was like from column line to column line was a wholly different country.
Sure.
Like, they're like, it's chaos. But that was the beauty of it.
Yeah.
Right. And it's important to understand, I guess this partially goes back to the service component, but like we are blessed to be able to work for our clients, right? We are a service provider. This is your building, your space. It isn't mine.
Right.
Right. And, architects and designers frequently have this reputation for the ego, right? You hear it all the time. I can say in all sincerity, I have met very few architects and designers who actually live up to that reputation. So I don't have the experience of it, but I hear it enough, right? And so, which is strange to me because we are there to provide a service to you. I'm designing your space, not my space, right? And I mean, it's on me to make sure that you're happy at the end. If I can get some good photos of it, great.
Right.
But like the end goal is not a photo. That's not what gets me my next job. And I think a lot of firms are looking so much for the eye candy.
Yeah.
Like that eye candy is going to get me my next job. Like I think the relationship that you're building with this person who will see themselves in their space and not you is what gets you your next job.
Right. Yeah.
Because they bring that with them wherever they go.
Well, it is like a photographer that, does family portraits and says, I'm only going to do good looking people or I'm only doing models.
Exactly.
Right? No, you're going to do families because you're capturing the beauty of the family or what's, them in their setting. So I love it. I mean, I think one of the you bring it to modern workplace. I think one of the things that people are really really considering now is a hybrid, right?
Oh yeah.
And so trying to make those decisions, trying to understand what space is, even if you've got enough room to do pilots and you've got time and you've got, it's what does the future look like as far as how many people are going to be in my space? And the pendulum is swinging a little bit. It was, before the pandemic, it was jam as many people in, like you said, on the bench. What's the square footage per employee? Right. Then it was everybody go home.
Right.
Now it's like, we want to bring people back, but we're not sure if they'll leave the company if we make them. So how do we incentivize them? Yeah. But as companies are thinking about a high performing space that really is that for their organization to take the beauty of the sizzle out of it, but something that really works for them. How are you helping them understand what maybe the future looks like as it relates to hybrid? Yeah.
So I don't think there's, and I'm going to speak. And most of this conversation is about knowledge workers, right? Because there's some things you can't do, like you can't work on an assembly line from home, right?
Exactly.
So talking specifically about these, actually call centers was an interesting one because it turned out you have more insight as to what your call center employees are doing when they're at home on a computer that you gave them and are monitoring than you do when they were in the office.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's actually less expensive and more effective to leave them at home. Which a lot of companies are coming to that understanding of, right? In some cases, I mean, other cases not because there's training and blah blah blah. But I think that in looking at that, the topic of sort of hybrid, it's important to understand that I think there's always going to be some version of hybrid, right? There are going to be some companies that will put their foot down and say, no, we are an all remote, and there are some that are going to put their foot down and say, no, we are all in person all the time. Have at it. Right?
And we had that before the pandemic to some extent, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, and it's not shaming either one of those groups.
Right.
If that's what works for your culture and you're actually effective and you're hitting your numbers that you want to hit and your culture is good, awesome. Good for you. Right. But like everything else, there's a bell curve. Now the bell curve has shifted because it used to be everybody in the office all the time was the middle of the bell curve and hybrid and remote were the ends, the tails.
Yeah.
Well, we're getting to a point now where hybrid, I think remote is always going to be a tail. It's a bigger tail now than it was before, but it's always going to be a tail. And I think the hybrid is now long view. I predict it's going to be pretty close to the same. I don't think it's going to be hybrid and in person being a tail.
Yeah.
I think they're going to wind up being pretty close because some companies are not able to effectively do their work as well remotely, right? Particularly ones that involve collaborative effort. Now, that doesn't mean you can't collaborate. You absolutely can, but the speed of it is much slower.
Right. Yep.
And so there are some that are looking at that, like for ourselves, we don't have a specific policy because in the 30 years of the company, there's never been a specific policy. If you are going to be someplace like this morning, I was in South Illinois this morning, right?
Some down,
right. So and then to come back here, it wouldn't make any sense for my in between to go to the office because why?
I had to be there,
right?
Yeah,
right. And so I have the good fortune to work for a company that a long time ago realized that your job is to be as effective as you can be. You can choose where that is. Yeah. You should let people know where it is, but like choose what's right for you. And I think there's going to be a lot more of that sort of notion of it. If you're hitting your goals and you're being effective and the company is surviving and thriving and has a good culture, it's going to wind up being whatever that hybrid is. Now that's going to be a huge shift along that line. But some of the things that we can do I'm speaking more like some of these settings, right? It has to provide, at a minimum, bluntly, a better access to resources than you can at home if you want people to come in, right? So at home, I have to some degree, even if I have a dog and kids and blah, 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 right? I know in my house, if I need to take a call, whether I'm on camera or not, there's a place that I can go where they know not to disturb me or I can sort of control access, to have that dedicated thing, right? For most people. Excuse me. But in the office, if everything is seamless and it's faster and it's cleaner, you're going to choose that long term because it makes you more effective. But it has to be something where now, there was an interesting study that I was just reading actually, where it was asking managers and it was asking employees about their effectiveness before and after pandemic and working from home and working from the office. In the middle, effectively was an agreement that you were productive and effective during the pandemic. Like both agreed on that. But where there was an absolute huge differential was whether it was going to be more effective in terms of at home, which all the individuals said they were more effective at home long term. And all the managers said you were more effective in the office. But when you dig into it, it's not quite us versus them.
Right.
And the study sort of drove it down to dollars, right? What your output costs and what it brings into the company, right? It's a business. That's how they're going to look at it. Those metrics were fascinating because when they asked people about that, the managers only accounted for the time that the people were physically in the office for the metric. But every staff member figured their commute into it. And so suddenly they were much less effective coming into the office because they were adding in that 2 hours, 1 hour, whatever it was, commute where they could not be effective because they were doing something else. And in their eyes, that's not my time.
Right. Work time.
Right. That's work time.
Yeah.
So I think the commute is the thing that people are going to be talking about sort of long term about how that factors in. But if I'm going to get in the car, I'm going to get on the train and take my hour to get there or whatever your commute time is, there has to be a collection of better resources where I'm going than I have at my disposal at home. There have to be people, right? I'm not going to go to an empty office.
I think that's the big one. I was going to ask if you include people in that resources.
Absolutely,
but yes, I mean, that is the big one, right? Like you can't most people's commute isn't justified because they have a bigger screen in their office, right?
Right.
It's that they're there with people that
Right.
help them to do their job better.
Right.
Whether that's development,
Right.
or pushing them in a competitive innovation culture,
right.
or visibility to leaders, whatever it is.
Or simply engaging.
Yes. Yeah.
We are social animals.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I mean, whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, you still benefit from other people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. It's just how you express yourself. Right. So I think it's important to understand, and absolutely that people are part of that.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so we can design spaces that will accommodate the types of things that you're doing. Now, the types of things that we're doing in the office space in a hybrid world are different than what they're doing in the pre-pandemic, where we had one answer, right?
Yeah.
So now we were beginning, and you spoke about it earlier, we had already begun the process of sort of delaminating the work experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
You go back to the 80s, your cubicle was all of the things. You did all of your work, regardless of what the work was, in the cubicle or in a conference room.
Yeah.
Usually when you were called to it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so then you get into this, just before the pandemic, a wide range of space types within the office that are purpose built for a different type of activity.
Mm-hmm.
And it delaminated my cubicle and all of the things I did in it into spaces that were better suited for each of those tasks.
Mm-hmm.
Not many organizations explained to staff how to use them.
Mm-hmm.
And so regularly we would sit down and you would hear people say, well, we moved them into this. And a lot of times this was for large corporations. So we moved them into the open office, setting, and, we're not getting a high adoption.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Their experience, you took down my walls and gave me a smaller desk.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Did you tell them what that room is for?
Mm-hmm. Or that you could even go into it?
Right.
Yeah.
And then, and the other thing is that, again, building culture.
Mm-hmm.
If you tell me then I can work on that sofa and that is acceptable, but I refuse to do it, then I'm not actually sending the message it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Or worse, if you put it there, we have a whole conversation about that being a work lounge,
mm-hmm.
and then the C-suite walks by and gives me the side eye because I'm sitting on the sofa, so clearly I'm not working. Well, I'm not going to go to the sofa. Right? So then you just have all this wasted space. I would hear this from a lot of C-suite there. Well, we have all this wasted space with this collaboration. I'm like, you have to use the air quotes around the collaboration. Well, it's not collaboration because you won't allow it to be.
Right.
Like, you should go sit there with your laptop,
mm-hmm.
have a casual conversation with somebody. That tells everybody it's okay, and you'll get better use out of these. But looking at what you're doing, that training is critical. But we're not usually part of that.
Yeah.
Right. We design the space. We tell you how it's going to be used. As soon as we're done, you don't want to pay us anymore. I get it. As soon as we're done, we're out. But rarely is anybody taking the time to explain how these new types of spaces were designed to be used to help you be better at your job.
Mm-hmm.
It's, hey, we have a new office. Hope y'all like it. Okay. Well, hope is not a strategy, as we know. So, and looking at that, when we look at hybrid, it's looking at these things are still different again than they were before.
Yeah.
I think there's going to continue to be in companies that embrace hybrid, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not going to talk about the tails.
Mm-hmm.
In companies that embrace hybrid, we're going to be seeing, I think, some new prototypes of types of spaces, right? So we're still thinking very much about the individual, but frequently when people are coming in, they're not coming into work by themselves around other people. I'm coming in because you and I are working on something.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I also don't want to sit in an enclosed conference room to have that, right? So you're going to be seeing a lot more of, a pair desk or a quad desk, where the team that I work with regularly from my hybrid location, but we just need to sit together, right? And it could be set up as teaming areas, but the products will change to be able to provide that easy transfer of knowledge and information. So we're always talking about the privacy, and putting up walls between us. It's going to look more like, and many of these things are going to look more like just a table, right? With enough space for me to put all my crap and have the conversation.
Yeah.
And set up in a place where it's okay for us to be a little louder, because that's what we're there for.
Right.
And so I think we're going to see more variations of the types of collaborative spaces that we've already been doing, but ones that are more custom built so that, and many of those, perfect example, we actually just did this one for a group that has a full-time offsite team. They work regularly with another hybrid team. So when they come together, that group had said when the 4 people they worked with that worked together in person at the location, the people who were working as an offsite in India basically said, we appreciate this, but we always feel othered, essentially. because this group is talking together and they'll be writing on things and like the camera's over here, like, oh yeah, what do you think about this? I'm like, I can't see what you're doing. So, we worked with them to develop these sort of little pods that have a full height monitor on the wall. The table is anchored to the wall and there's a camera that's at eye level and the screen is just slightly above eye level, right? So that way when I turn to look at you and the camera's right here, it still looks like I'm looking at you versus if the camera's out there like, oh, hi, Joe, hi, right? Right. And so that created some engagement, but they could also see the table. And that was important because if somebody was like, oh, what about this? At least then there was an awareness, and they said themselves said they felt more comfortable if somebody had scribbled something and lifted out the paper, say, oh, can you flip that to the camera? Right.
Yeah.
And it just, these little things that if I put you at my level and I see you at eye level, I will engage with you.
Yeah.
It's the inverse of the thing where you never wanted to be in the cubicle right by the front door because you felt like you were the welcome committee. Yeah. Like everybody came in, you felt
the boss's office.
Right, exactly. You felt like you were required to or I used to, my first desk that I had when I was working in Boston when I started was just on the other side of where the bathroom access was. And so people would linger there and and every day I was like, well, I know everybody's bladder schedule.
Yeah, I have a similar situation right in this building.
Yeah. And so, but you feel compelled, like as somebody standing on the side of your desk, you're like, I have to look up and engage. And hi, how are you? Having a good day? A good weekend with the kids? Yeah, I have a deadline. Yep. Nope, this is good. So creating these settings where, being mindful of the fact that human nature is to connect. Right? So think about that pathway in, particularly in hybrid, right? Because if I'm coming in, and it's a slightly different slant on that in hybrid though, because before when we were thinking about only in office, you effectively want to shield as much as possible that sort of that welcome committee desk, right? In hybrid, people are there to see others, but I also don't want to be forced to engage with everybody that's there, right? So you may begin to layer spaces so that I can be sitting 10 feet away. If I'm 10 feet away and I can see your face, I don't feel like I need to shout over the 10 feet.
Right.
But if you're 2 feet away, I feel like it is my obligation to acknowledge you.
Well, and then you also talk about the difference between the human voice and something coming out of a speaker, right? Yeah. In a Zoom call or a Teams call. Yeah. And I think that's why what you talk about when you show those different pieces and the psychology behind the security and privacy. It's so important as you design these spaces that really are meant for the collaboration piece, right? And I love the concept of the path at the university. That part of that's the solution too, right? You talk about those collaboration spaces with the air quotes. Well, some of that might be process and communication, but part of it might be just put them in and see where people go, right? And then put the agility in to be able to make some changes if they don't naturally go over to them, so much good advice here. We could probably keep talking. Yours a wealth of knowledge. I have 100 other questions, but in the effort of a single podcast, episode, let's finish off with a couple personal or professional questions. But what's something you're excited for in the next 12 months?
The next 12 months, I'll do a bit of both.
Okay. Yeah.
So personal. So I am now an elected official.
Ooh.
Yeah. No, I was running uncontested, so it was sort of already
congratulations on your win.
But it actually happened, and so
that's
good.
Awesome.
So I was elected to be a trustee on my local village library board.
Nice.
Which I'm very excited about.
Yeah.
So that starts in the next month. I also will receive, if all goes well, my MBA in the next month.
Wow.
I finished my capstone paper and sent that in last week.
Excellent.
So I'm very much looking forward to spending more time with the tiny people that resemble me because I won't be doing the schoolwork anymore. So that is another thing, actually. As we're looking at the year ahead, we have a very old house that we're doing renovations to, and we're doing a lot of them ourselves. We also are doing a lot of yard work, and our 4-year-old is very excited about gardening. Who knew, right? So his great-grandma has a little plot of land behind her house, and she's a vegetable garden. And since the time he was 2, every time we would visit in the summer, he would run out to the garden and check on all of the vegetables and fruits that were. So now we're building that currently, as we speak, in our backyard. We have some planter boxes that he picked out what would grow there, and He's very excited about it.
Isn't it like you started this conversation talking about your experience as an 8-year-old and the ramp and the magenta office?
Yeah.
Isn't it crazy that the things that you kind of help them along, like the experiences you create for your kids could be transformative for the rest of their lives? Isn't that interesting to think about? Yeah, it's cool.
I mean, it's true about the spaces that we design too. Like design matters.
Yeah.
Every interaction that you have, right, has the power to change the trajectory of the person that you had that interaction with. Yeah. Every space that you design has the power to change how those people experience it. That's a serious thing.
That's powerful. Yeah.
That is powerful. And I think, and I take that very seriously. Like I'm mindful of that. And I encourage my staff to be mindful of that because like you are making spaces. Every decision you make is a decision, and indecision is also a decision. It's a bad one usually, but it is a decision, right? So make decisions based on the fact that you are creating an experience for people every time. Make it a good one. Make it one that supports them. And I think that's something there's great power in what we do, right? And if you can embrace that and internalize it and understand how to use that and make the world a better place, that's a pretty phenomenal thing.
It's exciting.
Right?
Yeah.
And then, so what else in next 12 months? So professionally, so, I'm at a firm now, the Studio GC that I have returned to. And I've returned to help continue to build that practice. And a lot of that is on me and the team that I've brought over with me, and we're very excited about taking this a somewhat unique approach to this sort of service-based to create these beautiful spaces. And I'm really excited to continue building that team and to continue to do great work on that. So it's fun to be at the beginning of something.
Yeah.
Right. So
and you're clearly passionate about it. I mean, like that exudes from what you say and what you know. And I think it's probably an exciting time for your team members too, to be able to like be part of that.
Yeah.
I think. You've mentioned a couple different studies that you've read recently. Has there been a resource that's been particularly helpful to you as you've advanced in your career?
Yeah, I mean, a number of resources that I sort of return to regularly. There are some things in the 1960s. Kevin Lynch wrote "Image of the City," right? It's a planning book that people use all the time.
Yeah.
But it has these basic tenets of understanding of human behavior. It's meant for like urban planning.
Yeah.
Right. But it applies all the way down to a home renovation, right? You have edges, you have paths, you have landmarks. You respond to them, right? And so there's the sort of, I would say, sort of what is intended to be broad scale that I've sort of minusculized, right?
Minusculized, I like that word.
But taking it through the broad scope. Yeah. So that's one that I return to on a regular basis.
Okay.
And really, it's an excellent book. And a lot of the things I'm looking at are more about human behavior, right, and how it relates to space. And I'm fascinated by looking at spaces that and reading up on sort of what went into it for research for spaces that are meant for generally marginalized communities, right? And I'm looking at this because honestly, if you design something that works for somebody who has difficulty doing that thing, it will be easier for those who do not have difficulty doing that thing.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. And so you look at spaces that help everybody do things well, they will literally help everybody do things well. Right.
Yeah.
And cool. So instead of looking at, again, it's looking at, I'm a voracious reader. Right. So, I'm constantly looking at Harvard Business Review. I read, right. And it's, that has nothing to do with space, but has a lot to do with behavior and a lot to do with most of my clients who are business owners, right?
Yeah.
What they're thinking, what they're reading gives me some perspective into what they're most concerned about now. Right. And I frequently, and this is another aside sort of for that inspiration, but that constant is I am frequently looking at the big fashion shows to see what is happening there and looking at art to see what's happening there. These tell you what's coming to us, right? So interior design is a faster response to general cultural phenomena than architecture because those projects are done more quickly, right? Fashion is faster still.
Sure.
So, and this is not at all meant to be political, so please don't take it as such. But if we look back to the fashion cycle in 2016, building up to 2016, right? There was a lot of conversation about military and about policing during that presidential election, in the lead up to it, these were two hot topics that were constantly being talked about. If you look at the fashion cycle, all of a sudden, navy blue, olive green, and embellishments at or around the shoulders and the chest, right? These are all subtle references. And I don't think any of the designers are thinking, I'm going to make a military jacket, right? But if that's constantly what you're hearing, you can't help but sort of start to do that. Yeah. You know,
it's cultural, right?
It's cultural.
It's like, what's going on, and then that's you had mentioned earlier. You're bringing that into bid presentations, and stuff, right? Exactly. Or client presentations. Exactly. That's cool. I like that.
Yeah. So that's where I sort of find those inspirations.
Very cool. Final question.
Yes.
We were gonna get into at one point, and we've run out of time to talk about the future of the designer.
It's bright.
I know. I'm good. We're there. We talked about
it. The future is bright.
Okay, good. So let's say that the trustee goes well. You're elected official, and you're going to go pursue the White House in 2024.
Wow, good for me.
So you're leaving Studio GC next year.
That's sad.
What are you going to tell? What's some words of wisdom that you'll leave behind?
Words of wisdom to leave behind. You know the right answer, right?
Yeah.
So designers, if you got into this, there are two things that you have. If you got into design and you're working effectively, and right, you have a good eye. You wouldn't have made it through school if you didn't, right? Because that's pretty much what you're being judged on.
Right.
You have a strong analytical mind because, again, you made it through the training. So you know these basic things. Trust yourself, right? And this is, one that is specific to so interior design is about 70% female, right? Yeah. And one piece of advice I've given to all of my new junior designers who are female, and I would happy to give this to any female designer anywhere, stop using the word just when you're saying what you're thinking. You weren't just thinking, you were thinking, and that's enough. I sit in this room and listen to incredibly intelligent, creative, capable women undermine themselves before they make their point by saying things like, well, I was just thinking. No, you are powerful. Lean into it. So believe in yourself. You have it in you to make greatness happen. That's what I have to say.
And that is a great way to finish this incredible conversation. Scott, you've been amazing to talk to. I love all of the things that you've been saying. You've given me a lot of new ideas and insights. So I can't thank you enough for being here.
Great.
Keep up the great work.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this conversation, please take a moment to rate our show. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the Work Inspired podcast so that you don't miss any of the incredible guests we have planned for upcoming episodes. We'll continue to find the best and brightest minds in business so that you can learn, grow, and succeed, and so that we can all work inspired. Work Inspired is brought to you by BOS, a leader in commercial working environments and a Hayworth best-in-class dealership. Experience our 360 approach and discover the team, tools, and techniques required to navigate the complexity of your next workspace at BOS.com. If you have ideas, feedback, or would like to be featured on our show, please email podcast@BOS.com. Thank you for listening. This has been a Workspace digital production. If you're interested in launching a podcast at your organization, please email info@workspace.digital for a free consultation.